Good evening and welcome to the Pittsburgh Public Schools second budget workshop. It is Monday, April 7th, 2025. My name is Emma Yord and I am the chair of the Business and Finance Committee. Tonight we have two items on the agenda. The first is a further discussion of the Manchester Chateau TRID development presented by Chief Development Officer of the URA, Tom Link. The second agenda item will be our second budget workshop presented by PPS's Chief Financial Officer, Ron Joseph. At this point, I will turn the meeting over to Tom Link, the folks from the URA, and the developers for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Tom Link. I am the URA's Chief Development Officer. I'm here with my colleagues who are Executive Director Sushila Namani Stanger, my colleague at the URA, James Reed, and Jim Holcomb, who's with the Pyatt Companies, who's the developer of the Esplanade project, is here as well to help answer questions and facilitate the presentation. So as was mentioned, first I want to thank you. Thank you for allowing us to brief the committee. We're excited to continue the discussions on this project and continue to advance it. The Pittsburgh Public Schools have been a partner to not just the URA, but the development and to the taxing bodies really for well over 30 years as we advance similar type projects over many decades. And I think it's important just to recognize for a moment, that the appreciation and the commitment that has been made over the past several decades to advancing development across our city and your engagement with these projects. So I want to take a moment just to thank you and thank the school district over many years for your partnership in this work. So for tonight's presentation, most of the presentation deck is information that has been presented at previous Business and Finance Committee. So what I'd like to do tonight is make sure that I focus on new information and focus on questions that we've received that folks wanted clarity on, and make sure that we address those questions to provide new information. I'm happy to go back to any slide in this deck and answer anything or go back through it, but I think for the purposes of this briefing and where we are today, it would be important to focus on the new and the questions that have been brought to our attention. Specifically, I want to talk a bit about how we got to the implementation plan. I think it's important to note that the implementation plan doesn't sort of exist in a vacuum. It is really the culmination of several years of community planning process and public process that has led to this plan and the consideration here today. So with that said, I'm going to move through the presentation. And what I'm going to do is kind of skip through. We did James did a great job last time going through a case study sort of generally on our tax diversion portfolio and the health of it. But for the purposes of this meeting, I'm going to push on to this slide here, which is really the Manchester Chateau TRID goals. So a question that we received, and I just want to make sure I answer this correctly. So is we'll talk more about Reunite Manchester. TRID can be used to address several goals related to using economic and community development to reunite the Manchester and Chateau neighborhoods. Which goals, how will this project address them, and where is this documented? So with this is where I kind of want to take just a step back. So kind of remind to the committee, to the board, and to the public that, again, this implementation plan is really the third of three primary public documents that have been studied and negotiated over several years to get to this point. All publicly led, publicly inputted processes to lead to the goals and the strategies that are outlined in the implementation plan. So really there are three relevant documents to make sure that we're all considering, and I would invite, all folks should really read these and make sure that they're familiar with them as they think about this. The first is the Manchester Chateau Neighborhood Plan. So this is publicly available on the city's planning's website. It was a plan that was developed starting in 2017. It was completed in 2019. It is on file with the City of Pittsburgh. City of Pittsburgh's Department of City Planning as a guiding document of principles and goals for planning and developing the Manchester Chateau community. The second, of course, is the Manchester TRID Planning Study, which is a study that came out of the neighborhood plan specifically as to the recommendation, I'll get to that in a second, to develop a TRID plan. So the TRID Planning Study came as a direct result of the recommendation of the neighborhood plan to continue to do study and to do work to think through and craft a Manchester TRID planning study, which was called Manchester Reunited, a transit revitalization investment district action strategy. Again, publicly available and available on City Planning's website. And then that brings us to the implementation plan, which is really a financial document and execution document, which takes the goals and strategies and puts together a document that says, okay, how do we take this study and execute it into a financial plan, which is essentially a tax diversion strategy to leverage new incremental taxes that would be created by a signature sort of catalytic project, which of course is the Esplanade development, to pay for the various goals and strategies that have been enumerated both in the neighborhood plan and in the TRID planning study. So there are several goals in the neighborhood plan. And when I say the neighborhood plan, I mean the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan that really are addressed through the Manchester Chateau TRID, and these were played out through the TRID planning study and of course in the implementation plan that we're describing here today. So one of the goals is it says encourage the provision. I'm just going to read these if it's okay, and certainly can come back to these. But goal number one, encourage the provision of safe, quality, affordable housing for current residents. So the Manchester Chateau TRID promotes the development of affordable rental and for sale housing by creating a multi-million-dollar affordable housing fund that can only be used to create and preserve affordable housing in the Manchester community. So this, one of the goals actually in the Manchester neighborhood plan talks about a housing trust. And this goes back to 2018 and how to fund this. The TRID and through the TRID planning study and through the TRID implementation plan creates a funding mechanism to seed what can be a housing trust fund to fund directly affordable housing just for the Manchester community. This is not citywide, it's specific for the Manchester community to encourage and invest directly in the preservation of and the creation of affordable housing in the Manchester community. Goal number 12 in the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan says ensure affordability for future generations. Generally speaking, and this is our experience at the URA when we fund affordable housing, is that when funding affordable housing development, both for sale and rental, generally speaking, have 30 or 40-year affordability periods, if not longer, because typically these developments will take advantage of a variety of tools, including things like low-income housing tax credits and others, and if the URA's land is involved, we'll have deed restrictions involved that ensure that the new housing that's preserved and or created for affordable housing is preserved over many, many years and can survive generations. Goal number 14 says implement revenue capture strategies to advance public and private projects. So the neighborhood plan, the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan specifically, calls for the creation of a TRID. It's very explicit. Goal number 14 says create a TRID. It's in the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan, and that is the next step in this process was, of course, the planning study. So the Manchester Chateau TRID fulfills this goal. Goal number 15 reads, enhance safety through roadway design improvements. So among the uses of funds for this TRID include roadway safety improvements throughout the Manchester Chateau community. So projects including the implementation of Beaver Avenue's two-way conversion, improvements to the Juniata underpass, and reimagining State Route 65 are some of the projects that are specifically funded through the TRID implementation plan. Goal number 16 reads, improve quality and access to public transit services. So the TRID, again, will be used to help with stationary planning at the Allegheny T Station, which is the T Station within the Manchester Chateau TRID boundary, and as we know, is sort of the last stop that could potentially, over much study and much funding, but could eventually be part of a strategy to expand the BRT or the light rail further along the State Route 65 corridor to further increase and improve connectivity, both for the city and for the Manchester Chateau community. So I will stop there, but I wanted to make sure that we kind of made these connections to the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan, the TRID planning study, and to the TRID implementation plan that is specifically being considered today, or not today, being discussed, hopefully, is considered for adoption. This is a slide that we have that kind of highlights these particular studies, but I've walked through those. I'm not going to spend too much time here on how TRID works because we talked about it at the previous committee meetings. I'm happy to stop, talk, and we can answer questions on these. But what TRID is essentially a value capture mechanism that takes unrealized but for a development's future incremental, generally speaking, real estate taxes, and captures a portion of those taxes to reinvest in whatever community infrastructure and other development, pre-development activity that may be necessary to unlock a development site. It's not all that, frankly, dissimilar to tax increment financing, but it's specifically within a construct called Transit Revitalization Investment District, which specifically ties to transit improvements and multimodal improvements, which we've, as I've described and as the implementation plan describes, as uses of funds for the TRID. This slide can get a little complicated, but just it demonstrates really what we're talking about. So the development site we're talking about for the Esplanade project currently has a de minimis, what I would describe de minimis tax base, right? So it generates about $84,000 annually in real estate taxes, and that's across all three taxing bodies. I think it's roughly $34,000 or so specifically to the school district and the balance to the other two taxing bodies. At full development of the Esplanade project, we're projecting upwards of $8 million in annual real estate tax revenue, of which a portion of it would be diverted, 75% would be diverted to help fund the various implementation plan projects that I've described and are described in the implementation plan. And 25% of that would be what we call unpledged, which would go directly to the taxing bodies. At the end of 20 years, it's important to note, at the end of 20 years of each individual financing, 100% of new taxes go to the taxing bodies. So I'll move on for this, but I think it's important to note that some query that I've heard is anybody else's real estate taxes involved. No, it's only the real estate taxes generated by the Esplanade development. Nobody else's taxes are captured in this mechanism. It's only those taxes that relate specifically to the development of the Esplanade, as is what's described in the TRID implementation plan. This is the boundary. I won't get too much into this, but the boundary, as you can see, is much larger than the Esplanade project, which is the blue sort of site in the corner there. That's where the Esplanade project is. The boundary is much larger than this. Why is it much larger than this? One, it allows for investment off-site. So investment that has been described and is articulated in the implementation plan for sort of off-site infrastructure can happen, including affordable housing, within this boundary outside of the Esplanade development project. And it also allows for future study. So totally making this up, but the future Tom Link at the URA, 10, 15 years from now, may come back and say there's a wonderful opportunity to do something similar with a new development to capture increment to create additional community infrastructure. Maybe it's an extension of the BRT, maybe it's something else that goes through the same sort of scrutiny and study that I've described for this implementation plan. It could come back for consideration by the taxing bodies. Thus, the boundary sort of allows for this continuous study and continuous opportunity to think about what else can happen in a corridor to capture future value to invest in infrastructure and neighborhood development. So that's sort of the purpose of why a much larger boundary. I'm going to skip the Esplanade development for one thing, and I'll turn that back over to the PIA team is here, can talk a bit about the Esplanade development. And stop here for a second, because we got specific questions on the economic impact and wanted to make sure that we provided answers that we could. One of the questions was in the economic impact report, asking about extensive infrastructure upgrades in the surrounding neighborhood. Where are these documented, and is the effort outside the scope of the proposed budget? So primarily, these projects consist of the two-way Beaver Avenue conversion, reconfiguring the Juniata underpass, other priorities that are identified within the Manchester Chateau neighborhood plan and the TRID can also be funded through the off-site portion of the TRID implementation plan. These could be pedestrian connections and also improvements to the Allegheny Station. A second question that we received on this, and this is highly specific, and I have to apologize for this because we may have to get you this information subsequent to this meeting, because standing here right now, I don't have the specific answer, but we were asked on page 13 of the economic impact report, please provide the minimum, maximum, and mean salaries for labor income quoted. We're going to have to get that we'll send that through Ira and Ron to make sure that the board is aware of those data points, but we will be sure to get those for you. They exist. The Economy League did the economic impact report. We just need to get that information from the Economy League. I can say that a couple things just to be aware of, that's not a specific answer to that question. All of the construction for the Esplanade development will be union labor, right? So these are going to be union jobs, union labor, so you can kind of think about that in terms of what wage rates will look like. And I also know that PIA, the developer, is working with Union 32 BJ, which is the service workers unions, on potential agreements as to the service workers components of the development. And then another question that was asked is on page 21. It asks, what are the neighborhood connections in the infrastructure section? And so this will be repetitive because I keep saying these things, but this will include the Juniata underpass improvements, the Route 65 study, potential implementation long-term, Beaver Avenue, again, infrastructure on Allegheny Avenue, and then, of course, the riverbank restoration and connections to the river that are afforded by the Esplanade project development themselves. So I wanted to make sure I answered those specific questions. We can certainly come back to them and provide additional context as needed. With that, what I want to do is just to, again, in the spirit of new information, and we'll come back to the Esplanade development itself, and I'll let the PIAT team can talk a bit about where they are. Is go to the to our legislative schedule, which might be a little small here, but hopefully you have it, and we can certainly send it. So, an important update since the last time we met. At the time, you might recall that when we were presenting, we were about to go in front of Pittsburgh City Council and about to have a public hearing that the City Council requires as to the consideration of tax diversions and specifically TRIDs in this case. Since then, that process has happened. City Council approved the TRID implementation plan, I believe unanimously. I hope that's correct. I believe it was unanimous approval of the implementation plan at City Council. And the public hearing occurred as part of that legislative process at the city. And at the public hearing, there was the folks who showed up at the city's public hearing were unanimous support of the TRID at the time. So that's an important update to provide. Allegheny County has had their first reading. So Allegheny County has effectively introduced the legislation through their legislative process. And they'll be, and we're working with the county and looking forward to the scheduling of the next dates with Allegheny County to effectuate their legislative process. So that's new information since the last time we met. We have a variety of data in this deck, and I'm happy to go through any of it that really gets into the detail on the specific tax increment and tax revenue generation across the taxing bodies and, of course, for the Pittsburgh Public Schools. That's the Esplanade sources and uses. And we also have these slides that talk about the offsite, which I basically talked about. So these are the core sort of offsite infrastructure projects that the TRID implementation plan promises to deliver in part with the funding that the TRID creates. And of course, it's Beaver Avenue two-way conversion, Juniata Underpass, Allegheny Avenue public space improvements, implementation of, in part of the Route 65 planning study, and as I've mentioned earlier, financing specifically for affordable housing. And just to be clear, the TRID implementation plan will create essentially what is a trust fund that'll be administered to invest directly into the preservation and creation of affordable housing within the full of the district that surrounds the Manchester Chateau study area. With that, I'd like to invite, if that's okay, maybe Jim, if you want to just give an update on where you are with, we have a couple slides here, you can use my slides or not, but just give a quick update on where you are from a development perspective, and then I think from there we can do questions and answers if that's okay. Okay, thanks, Jim.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Holcomb. I'm the Director of Development for the PIAT companies. Let me just start by just saying, PIATs are a Pittsburgh company. We're committed to doing things to uplift Pittsburgh and doing them in the right way. The company is a pioneer in development of residential housing downtown. It's been very successful. We want to continue that partnership. The Esplanade in particular is not currently a buildable site. It needs infrastructure. It's bisected by a trail and by existing utilities that were left in place when they redeveloped in 1965 the Chateau area. So great expense there in dealing with those existing utilities and relocating them to make it buildable. It's got adverse environmental conditions. It's in a floodplain. It's got one-way access, right? So it needs new utilities. It needs new utilities relocated. It needs lifted out of the floodplain. It needs environmental remediation, and it needs roadways and infrastructure on the site to support new buildings. No one lives on the site currently. In fact, I think the last census had somewhere around 14 or 15 people living in the entire Chateau census tract, right? So there's no displacement associated with this on a personal level. There's one company who is an occupant at the site that will be relocated. They are selling their property for the development of the project. So that was a voluntary displacement. The entire project is either on vacant land, which has been off the tax rolls since 2003, or on underutilized, underdeveloped, decrepit buildings that generate, as we've talked about, $80,000 in annual taxes. It's a locked site, and the TRID will unlock it. It'll also catalyze future development that can benefit the community, the neighborhood, the taxing bodies, and the people around it. We've been engaged with Manchester community for over 8 years. We've heard what people said. We understand the neighborhood's priorities as they've expressed them to us personally, in the neighborhood plan, in the TRID planning study, and in their review of the projects that we've proposed and sought their feedback on. And we will continue our engagement for the next several years as this project advances, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. As you know, your last public hearing was very lengthy because of other board agenda items. I'll say it this way, we watched and listened to that entire comment period, and we understand what people's comments were. We did not send a litany of people to testify on our behalf because we knew the length of the meeting. However, we do know that at City Planning we had incredible numbers of favorable testimony at that meeting. And so at your next public hearing, we will certainly be prepared and have people there to tell you what they believe about our project and the benefits it can bring. I mentioned that there was a lot at City Planning or at City Council, and the City Council passed it unanimously. Next important thing that I want to talk about is our engagement with Manchester, because it yielded several goals in addition to the project, and one of them was workforce component, right? So it's opportunities from an MWI, an MBE, and entrepreneurial levels, right? So that's workforce. So in addition to our commitments to the URA on MWI and MWBE participation, all in conjunction with their guidelines, we've had numerous discussions with other groups to help us with those components. That's CCAC, Manchester Bidwell Corporation, and most recently Partner for Work, who is a godsend to us. Because in order for us to deliver all the things we want to deliver and what we've committed to the neighborhood, we need a partner who's been there and done that so we don't have to do it all again. Partner for Work, if you're not familiar, I'll just talk a little bit about them. Well, before I do that, beyond construction, there'll be opportunities after construction, right, for small local businesses, and that's during construction as support, like a catering truck or security guard, that sort of thing, or incubator opportunities within the project as it develops. Partner for Work specifically, though, will be engaged similar to what they do at their Pit for Work program at the airport. They use a series of cohorts to introduce people who are new to the construction industry to the process. They meet on site and in a classroom to learn about construction with supportive services for babysitting or travel to the job, right? So the project's going to have that. They recruit initially locally in the neighborhood and then growing outward to pre-apprenticeship programs for the trade unions. They don't have to pick one. They get to go to the site and learn about all of the different opportunities in the trades. If the person's successful, they attend, they meet their goals, they'll gain entry into a union pre-apprenticeship program as soon as they complete the process. The one of their choice, right? They'll likely be recruited into one of them or by one of the employers who's working at the site. If they don't like construction, Partner for Work will help them find training to go into another field that they have interest in. Later, their program, the Partner for Work program, will expand into other potential opportunities. At Pit to Work at the airport, which also began with construction, this is expanded into airport jobs, airline jobs, and jobs with the vendors within the airport. And the same will occur at Esplanade, provided that the TRID legislation makes it possible. In the coming months, Partner for Work is going to begin their community outreach. We've already met with Councilman Lavelle and Partner for Work to start arranging pre-announcements to lead up to announcements to lead up to recruitment, right? The opportunities begin with vertical construction. Site work is not really a good opportunity for it. However, we've offered our site to be a place where they can bring other cohorts and expose them to site construction, which is one aspect they don't get a lot of at the airport. And other partners like Mascaro Construction and the building trades unions will participate in that process, as well as job fairs, other opportunities for training, M and WBE, business opportunities and recruitment. We've already had one fair. We're going to be at the job fairs. There'll be more to it, and other small business engagement. So I just want to talk for a minute about what will occur in the near-term future if the legislation is approved. Site work in advance of building construction will occur first. Erosion control, stormwater management, earth moving, utility relocation, building demolition. This work is going to take, not to mention the remediation. This will take about a year to complete, and we'll create individual building pads for the vertical construction to occur on for the 7 buildings you can see in the plan. I'll just talk a little bit about phasing. You can see what's in color. That is our phase 1. That is almost entirely on the URA parcel, save the parking garage. That's to the far left of the screen. Future phases are the white buildings on the very far left of the screen. So we have a Ferris wheel and welcome center building on the right. We have the Current, which is a retail and food-centric building where we can have fresh foods and good dining experiences and grab and go and those sorts of things. An apartment building in the background on top of a retail podium that would have other experiential and food and normal retail type stuff. And then also a parking garage that will support all of those uses across the street that will also have retail. It's currently programmed to have a grocery store, which the community desperately needs. We have not been able to sign a lease until we have a project. We can't do that, but we have seen great interest in it, and we expect that we would be able to sign a letter of intent shortly after breaking construction on the site. In the future, the building in the foreground that's about 10 or 12 stories is a condominium building that's for sale. Building to the far left is another residential apartment building for rent. In the background, we have an office tower proposed to sit above the parking garage. And in the far back left-hand corner, that's been something that we've been marketing and hoping would be an aquarium, but it will be a destination attraction themed with a hotel that's attached to it. So job creating and revenue creating, right? So that we can all keep this thing carried forward. So the architecture and engineering of none of those buildings has been done. That will occur simultaneously with the site work. So we've drawn pretty pictures and kind of worked out how things will work together and meet zoning, but the actual design has yet to occur. That'll be simultaneous with the site development. We'll go back through public process, through community input, through planning commission, through building permitting, and then be ready for construction when site work wraps up a year from its commencement. And then additionally, we've helped secure funding for converting Beaver Avenue to two-way traffic. That's a $10 million grant from the state. That we believe, based upon the pricing we got, will carry it from start to finish. But the TRID stands as a backup to help complete that work or to add any community programming into the underpass that they so choose. That won't be under our control. So I wanted to touch back on community engagement. So we've been meeting with the community for over 8 years when Manchester Citizens Corporation was the Community Development Corporation. There was no RCO. Now there are two RCOs. Hundreds of meetings with the stakeholders around the site and involved in the site or near the project who were invited based upon our request to them or their request to us. We met. We've had at least 8 open community meetings with the neighborhood where everybody was invited, beginning in 2018 and wrapping up initially before we submitted for master plan to the city in 2021. Then that doesn't even count the numerous community meetings around the Manchester Neighborhood Plan, the TRID planning study, and the TRID development and enactment process. So there has been an unbelievable amount, something we are incredibly proud of outreach to the community, working with them as our partners to make our project a beneficial impact to everyone there. That doesn't mean every single person, right? But it's to that community, to Pittsburgh as a city, to the region. We think we've done everything we can possibly do. We are going to continue that through both RCOs. And what we want to do is do that jointly and transparently, working with Councilman Lavelle to engage in future community meetings. We just recently received a request that we will send a response to tonight from the Manchester Neighbors Group to meet with them. And we have reached out to Councilman Lavelle simultaneously to go ahead and schedule the meeting. We also have, he has, not we have, but he has started working towards scheduling a meeting relative to property programs, facade programs, and preservation of your right to stay in your neighborhood, as well as the Partner for Work meeting, initial outreach meeting that I've mentioned already. We'll be there when we're asked to or when we have new information to present and get input on. We've also have an FAQ page added to our company website, as long as an opportunity for any individual, anybody to reach out directly and ask questions or make contact with us. So to wrap up, and if you'd like to hear more, please, about the project, I'm happy to, but the Esplanade will be an economic driver. It's going to create jobs, it's going to create tax revenue, it's going to create opportunity, and it's only possible with the TRID. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holcomb and Mr. Link, for your presentations. I'm sure board members have a few questions for you, but before I open it up to questions, I want to summarize some of what y'all talked about this evening, which I think addresses some of the questions board members have. So there will be minority and women-owned business considerations when it comes to this site. It will be affordable housing available both on the site, and then there is that separate trust fund that they talked about that will be used to develop affordable housing off-site. Past grids have resulted in significant money for PPS. In the slide deck that was sent out last week, and I believe in the one that Stephanie sent out earlier this evening, there's a summary of all of the TRIDs and the tax revenue that PPS has benefited from. So we have seen tax revenue increases as a result of previous TRIDs. This current project, the estimates are that we would get $2 million for the first, I believe it's 25 years. And then once the site is fully developed, thank you. Once the site is fully developed, there will be, we'll get an additional $8 million to PPS as a result of this. That said, we all know that PPS is currently facing approximately a $25 to $30 million shortfall every year, and that's projected to grow. So while we would see an increase in tax revenue from this in the near and the long term, it would not make a dent in the budget shortfall that we're seeing, in case that's a consideration for folks. The gentleman who presented mentioned that City Council has already passed this. County Council has not yet. So I just wanted to summarize that to preempt any questions from the board. And the other thing that I want to ask the board as we start to go through questions is that just to remember, it's not our job to be urban planners and to question the types of development that's happening at this site or why there are certain components happening at the site. Our job is to ask questions and make decisions that are most relevant to Pittsburgh's public schools, how it impacts us as a taxing authority, and how it impacts the education that we are able to provide to our students. Seeing no questions from the folks online, I will ask Ms. Silk to take charge of facilitating any questions from folks who are in person.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the mic to Director Barker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank y'all for this presentation. Just a couple of questions. And I think Director York just touched base on one in regards to the $2 million. So just for clarity, I know she said it, but I want to hear it all from you all again. The $2 million would be strictly for PPS, or would that be divided amongst all three taxing bodies?
So the $2 million I think you're referring to is just for PPS.
Okay, that's good to know. All right. So in regards to where you all, because I'm looking at your little chunk of land here that you all are trying to build the beautiful, luxurious project on, right? Have you all done, or have you all had the opportunity to do any soil sampling? Because you were saying that this is a former industrial space that was underutilized for many, many years. So have you all done any sampling of the soil to get a clear understanding of what you're dealing with?
Sorry, you got me? So yes, we've done a robust amount. Spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing studying of not only the soil but the groundwater to determine what is there. We have 3,000-page environmental report that talks about the various constituents, none of which is hazardous, but many of which are above what would be considered publicly safe to occupy, especially in a residential situation. We have created a remediation, and I'm going to lose the technical term, but a plan to address those constituents and how to make the site safe and enter it into what is known as the Act 2 program, which is an EPA program administered by the state of Pennsylvania to ensure that people are not put at risk, including construction workers, et cetera. So it's an incredibly robust and thorough report, and that is our intent to follow that report as we develop the site.
Thank you for that. In regards to the site, you all spoke about there being a some type of development to connect Manchester from Julietta. Would that be you all, or that's just something that you all were just talking about in regards to beyond phase 1? Yes.
Go ahead. That would be a project that's, go ahead, James. Oh, I'm sorry.
So the Juniata underpass, that work would be undertaken by DOMI in concert with city planning.
Okay, so
Thank you.
that's the Department of Infrastructure and Mobility.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mobility and Infrastructure at the City of
Okay.
Pittsburgh.
All right.
And just an update on that study, that was funded with a Reconnecting Communities grant from the federal government. And I just got an update earlier, the consultant was selected by the city, and they're having a kickoff late this month, and it's an 12-month study. So it will be done in a year. And we'll make recommendations about how to undertake and really frankly deal with the Route 65 corridor as a dividing line between those two communities.
Thank you for that. And the last thing I want to say is thank you all, Pyatt, for saying that you will meet with the other ORCO down Manchester. I think you all presented a lot of positive feedback from a lot of people, but if there are some that are not 100% on board, they have enough respect for them to actually sit down with them and talk to them about some of the things that they're concerned about. It's pretty noble, so I look forward to that feedback as well, because they have been coming to our meetings, giving us some of their facts that they've conjured up in regards to how they truly feel about it. So thank you all for having the opportunity and letting us know that you will be touching base with them soon. I hope that Councilman Lavelle does not slow up that process, and if he does, I want you all to take the initiative yourselves and have a conversation with them, please.
Understood.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, me. I really, truly don't have any questions. I guess my comments are perhaps we'll be getting $2 million. $2 million is better than $0 at this point. I look forward to I'm hoping that we will pass this. The number of people that will be able to work, the jobs, the improvement in the area. It's just making a brownfield into something that is right now nothing. And that's something that's very positive that we should really embrace. I appreciate, that was my question about community involvement. because you would think that you hadn't met with anybody. I was particularly upset because I understand the one individual was extremely appreciative of the project and enjoyed it, embraced it, and then turned around and went the opposite way and is now against it, which I don't understand. But that was the reason I wanted to know what kind of community involvement had been done. And over the last 8 years, it seems like you've had a lot. And I understand that you had at least 8 open meetings, and whoever came, came. And so obviously, some people came and a whole bunch of other people did not. That's not your fault that that didn't occur. But I look at this whole project as a positive against jobs. I mean, sometimes when we have people come to us with plans and we ask about who's going to work, we ask about union jobs, and some people scratch their head and don't understand exactly why we're even asking that question. We didn't even have to ask because you immediately said these are going to be done by union workers, which I extremely appreciate because we know that that means we're going to have work done correctly and with pride, and also your community. It's also giving back to the community because these are people who live and work here, and we're not dealing with someone who came from 3 or 4 states away to come here and do that work. So I'm appreciative of this. I know folks have questions, but I know that the city of Pittsburgh wouldn't have approved it if they didn't see some of the positives in this as well, because obviously this is going to be something that improves Pittsburgh. And once again, a brownfield is a brownfield. It does nothing for anybody. And we don't often have people come and want to make improvements the way this project is. So that's for me. That's my perspective, and I know I'm speaking for a lot of people as well. I might not be speaking for a lot of people on this board, but I am definitely speaking for a lot of folks that live in the city of Pittsburgh. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. I just want to make a request that well, first of all, thank you for answering the specific questions that we submitted in advance. We'll look forward to getting the additional data around salaries. And I did notice that you were reading off answers. And so if the answers that you spoke into the meeting are written down and you could submit those in writing, that would be lovely.
Okay. I can do that.
Thank you. I think that's all for questions in the room. Okay, yes, we have a question from the solicitor's office.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Sattler. I'm with Weiss, Burkhart, and Kramer. I had 2 questions. The first is on your slide that discusses the projected annual tax revenue for the schools for $2.5 million. That's over both phases, correct?
Yes.
So, I'm looking right at it. I apologize.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
okay.
Yeah, what is the timeline, if you could just remind the board, of phase 1 and phase 2?
Sure.
If everything gets passed soon, what would be the timeline?
So I will start and let our development partners probably fill in the blanks. So assuming the legislation, that's a big point here. Assuming this legislation gets passed by all 3 taxing bodies, by the way.
Correct.
That really will allow for the beginning of the site prep work, right? So there's much, as Jim described, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to unlock the site, to start thinking about vertical construction. So that will take at least, I think, a year, correct, Jim? So let's just using simple math, let's say April 25th, we're all done. April of 2026, perhaps, probably into the summer of 26. Hopefully the site preparation and the site work is nearing completion. At that point, it will allow for vertical development to start. Now, some of that I think is in process, and I can let Jim fill in blanks, because as financing, as we all know, watching market conditions change on a daily basis, frankly, financing conditions, that will play itself out while the site development is happening as to which projects can happen and close on financing and on what schedule to start vertical construction. Generally speaking, phase A, which is sort of the first phase that Jim described, the goal would be after all the site development is completed that the full of phase A could be completed within, I'm going to say it and you can correct me
You mean
wrong.
all 4 buildings?
Yeah.
I would say 2 years after the first building starts, right?
Okay.
We'll be open, occupied, up and running.
Okay.
So adds up to about 3 years total. We all want it to go faster, so we're spending more money on buildings and less money on interest. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Apologies.
So the answer was the longest building will take about 2 years from when site work is done, so about 3 years from commencement. So if it's summer of '25 when we break ground, it would be summer of '28 when things open.
For the first bill.
For the first 4 buildings,
First
right?
4 buildings,
Yeah,
okay.
they would all open simultaneously. The
And
other
the-
buildings would follow very close behind, obviously based upon absorption of those buildings and the rental units and the success of retail. The condos, our hope would be to start pre-sales after site work is commenced and be able to begin that 4th building, which is additional revenue. You know, one of the things that's reflected on all of the URA's documents are the taxes that were part of diversion, right? But when we sell a condominium building, it's going to pay transfer taxes, right? So those sorts of things aren't necessarily reflected here, but they're true. So there'll be other revenues. Construction workers who work in the city who are paying payroll taxes are going to happen earlier that aren't captured here. I don't think anybody's ever really quantified them exactly, but that they exist. So I thought it was worth adding.
And I'll just add, I think as we know, once a vertical construction is complete, it has to get reassessed and go through the reassessment process, and assessed value is established, which then triggers the tax value and the tax payments that will be made. And part of that, we haven't talked about it here, but part of the mechanics of this is we work with and it's not just in this particular tax diversion project, but any of our tax diversion projects. We enter into minimum payment agreements with our developers to ensure that, when we get through the assessment process and it's assessed at the values that we're projecting, you can't come back later and pay less than that, right? It's important that it stays at that base level and that those taxes get paid. And that's an important point because things can change, right? So at the time of reassessment, whatever that value is and the taxes being paid at that time are the baseline, right? So if something happens I'm just making this up, reassessment, if millage rates go up and down, whatever happens, these parcels will pay the real estate taxes that were defined at the time of reassessment to ensure that these dollars are there.
My second question right out of my
Okay,
mouth, so
good.
thank you. I was going to ask
You're
you just to
welcome.
confirm that there
Yeah.
would be minimum payments.
Yeah.
So then it would be too early then to ask for commitments for any retail or condominiums. You have to wait until the buildings are being built. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think that is all I have.
Thank you.
Director Yard, I believe that's all the questions in the room. There's one more question in the room, Director Barker.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Really quick, this is called the Transit Revitalization Investment District, TRED, right?
Yep.
So, based off of everything that is going on with Port Authority, what is their part in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's from a project perspective, there's one specific project, which is the study of Allegheny Station. So that's a PRT facility, and there's funding from this TRID that will help pay for a study of that station and potential improvements to it. So that's a very specific PRT role. From a legislative process, the PRT will be asked to enter into a cooperation agreement, as all the taxing bodies are being asked to, pursuant to legislation, to participate in that cooperation agreement to implement the TRID.
So they're going to be the ones that have to fund it?
I mean, on the Allegheny Station project in particular, they would be the lead entity, so they would be working through their mechanisms and their funding streams to raise additional monies beyond what the TRID can provide for the Allegheny Station project.
Okay. And this is not directed, so this is for my amazing director that's sitting to the left of me. Director Wilson, you said that a lot of people that you have spoken to are in agreement with this. So my question is, are they Manchester residents that may be directly affected by this, or is this people that live across the city? Because I think one of the problems that we all find ourselves speaking about is something that may directly affect people. Some people might not have the wherewithal to understand how it can technically impact people in the long run. So I don't want you to think I'm attacking you because I love you to death. However, when you made the comment it made me think everyone's voice hasn't been heard yet, but you're speaking as if you've heard some voices, and I just want to know what region did these voices voice their opinion?
I'm talking about people in the city of Pittsburgh, because this doesn't just impact the Manchester Chateau area, it impacts the whole entire city. I understand, and that's why my original question to them was to ask what community involvement had been done. And that's why they gave me the answer, gave us those answers that they gave, because I am looking at this overall and not just in one area, because this does not impact only that section. It does impact the whole city.
Financially, yes. However, economically, in regards to who may be possibly displaced, it would most definitely impact Manchester before it impacts anywhere else in the city, unless people from Manchester that are potentially being displaced or being displaced other places in the city, and folk may not be happy that that is happening. We are living in a city where redlining was a thing at one point. So I just wanted to, just be crystal clear about why I ask. Again, it's not an attack. It's just that when you say what you say, you're speaking about people that technically aren't going to be the first impacted by it. However, I do understand that the city of Pittsburgh will benefit, but at the end of the day, who would be hit first? That's what that's all I was basically saying.
I understand that too, but again, the particular area that is being developed, people aren't living there. And this is an opportunity to provide additional living spaces that do not exist right now. Yes, some of the Manchester people may and decide to move there, and maybe not, but it's additional housing that we don't have at all.
Totally agree.
All right. And with that, as we will continue to discuss this at agenda review, I'm sure, Director Yord, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you. Director Walker has a question.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thanks. I don't actually have a question. I just, I wanted to weigh in. I know that we've been talking obviously about this and some other really important things for some time. And I'm excited that we had this opportunity tonight, and then again in a couple of weeks, to really kind of dive into this work particularly, because I think, I agree. I think there are challenges with a project like this because of the scope, because of the timeline, because of the impact that it could have on the community. And I think it's easy to look at what the potential downside is. It's a much different prospect, I think, to look at what the benefits are. And so when I think about the work that we have to do here in Pittsburgh to create a city that is both attractive for people to come and attractive for people to stay, I think it's projects like this that make it possible to grow and to prosper. And one of the things that I think we've heard, especially from the folks who have testified, is they're worried about this impacting Manchester, similar to the work that had been done in East Liberty. And I think we understand, some of the damaging effects that work in East Liberty had on the residents, in addition to the really good stuff. I think the biggest difference that I see between this project and what's happened in East Liberty is, East Liberty, we lost a ton of folks, a ton of population that had lived there for years, a ton of students who were going to Pittsburgh Public Schools, not necessarily because of the work that was being done, but because of the intentional actions, made to reduce the housing projects and Section 8 and those kind of decisions that drove our primary constituents, the folks that send their kids to our schools, out. I don't necessarily see that as an issue here in Manchester, and I think the biggest difference that I see is the commitment from this project to invest into the homeowners from, you know, the freezing of property tax increases to the home improvements. And so I say all that to say, you know, I think it's easy to be afraid of what we don't know because there's still a lot that we don't know about what the impact will be. Uh, but I think it's important that we look future and think about what this could mean, not just for that area, but for the city as a whole, and our ability to attract and retain folks that ultimately could help to solve many of the problems that we're having at Pittsburgh Public Schools from a finance perspective and from a student population standpoint. So I will stop there. I just wanted to make that comment. I wanted to thank the Pyatt Group for coming in. I think we've heard a ton from the URA, but it was important, I think, to hear from the developers who are really putting everything that they have on the line. You know, they're putting a lot on the line for this project and have spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources. And I appreciate you all coming along with the URA to explain this better. And I look forward to continuing this conversation over the coming weeks until we decide when it will show up on our agenda for a vote. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Director Walker. Thanks again to the folks from the URA and Pyatt for coming to this meeting. If any other questions come up from the board between now and agenda review, we'll communicate those via email to get any last questions from the board answered before we discuss this at agenda review and then vote on it at the end of April. At this point, the URA and Pyatt folks are welcome to stay for our budget workshop, but I'm sure that you all have families and dinners that you would like to get back to. So thank you very much for being here. I'll give a few moments for transition in the room, and I will turn it over to Mr. Ron Joseph for our budget workshop.
Okay, thank you very much. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Good evening. So tonight is going to be our first of 3 scheduled budget workshops. We can have more if you'd like, but we're required to have 3 by board resolution and board policy. So tonight's agenda will be a review of the unaudited 2024 general fund financial actuals. So that's the past year that we just closed. A review of state and federal funding on the horizon, our financial outlook, and next steps in the budget process. So as we look at our actuals, we ended the year at an $11.5 million deficit. So this is down from the nearly $30 million that we were projecting, but it is still a deficit. It's an improvement, but it's still a deficit, and it's still lowering our fund balances that are in reserve, fund balance that's in reserve. I know recently there's been a lot of talk about how we have surpluses when we project deficits, but in the last 10 years, we've had 3 surpluses in 2015, 2020, and 2023. So we have steadily been depleting our fund balance over the last 10 years. And if this continues, and if we don't have any change, we'll look out to 2027, where at some point during that year, we will run out of funds. So we've seen growth in our revenues and also growth in our expenditures, which have led to a decrease in our fund balance. So our revenue has increased by about $16 million, but in that same time, our expenditures have increased by almost double that amount, which has led to us having our deficit and using about $11.4 million of our total fund balance. So we're going to take a dive into some of our major revenue sources. So looking at earned income and real estate, we're going to look at those in based on their 2 components, because if we look at it as a whole, you might lose some of the story there. So our earned income and real estate taxes have 2 parts. We have our current year revenue, which is the revenue that's collected in the same year that the taxes are levied, and we have our prior year collections. So those are our prior delinquent collections. So those are collections for taxes that were levied in years prior to the current fiscal year. So if we look at our earned income, it continues to grow less than our current earned income grew from 2023, slightly less than what we were projecting by about $2 million, but still growth. But we continue to have strong collections of our prior earned income, so both components showed growth. But when we look at our real estate, we see that we decreased slightly in our current real estate tax collections while we had stronger than anticipated collections of prior and delinquent taxes. So what's note is even though overall it seems like everything's trending in the right direction, but looking at that current, that's where our appeals are going to take effect. So that lessening of the downtown tax base, that's that number that's going to hit that current number. So we are projecting declines in our real estate taxes going forward. So those were major local revenue sources, but when we look at our state revenues, we've seen some increases in certain areas, some slight decreases in some areas, but overall, state funding's been relatively flat as a whole, up by about $1.7 million. So while we have increases in our local taxes, state funding relatively level, and based on conversation at the state and what we're also projected based on the governor's budget, I don't see that increases by that much. On the expenditure side, we continue to see growth in our salaries, even though they were less than projected, which leads to our better than projected performance and why we came in with less of a deficit than we were projecting. Benefits came in less, as well as special education, but we saw upticks in transportation, charter schools, and tax appeals. Tax appeals, in fact, were over 200% more, and charter school expenditures were $13 million more than they were in 2023. Sorry that those transitions are out of order, but in the 12-month roll forward period for the last fiscal year, we saw a decrease in our fund balance by $11.4 million, which is what I stated. And that fund balance is made up of what's committed for future spending and what's committed for specific uses. So that's our total fund balance at $72.5 million. Our general fund revenues, I mentioned, rose by $16 million, but those were outpaced by the growth in our expenditures, which was $31.2 million. So when we look at state sources, this just a recap, only grew by $1.75 million. Local sources, we saw our earned income taxes were $7.8 million greater. Real estate revenue, I told the story of those two components. While they're greater as a whole, we saw a slight decrease in current, but we saw increases in prior year collections. And expenditures, salaries increased by 4.6%. Charter school expenditures increased by 9.24%. And our debt service, which is our payment for past borrowings for our capital projects, that number decreased. So we're continuing to try to lessen our amount of debt service through refundings or the way we structure our borrowings. And as I mentioned, that we saw a significant increase in our prior tax refunds, $8.8 million, over 210% over 2023, and that further goes to show the impact of those reductions in the central business district and those appeals that we have to pay out for prior year reductions. So state revenue. So in the governor's budget, there was a $75 million increase proposed in the basic education subsidy over the current school year's appropriations, and these are proposals. The governor proposes the budget. There's a long, lengthy budget process, and what we ultimately get may not be what was proposed. There was a large increase in Ready to Learn block grant funding, and this is the vehicle for addressing the Commonwealth litigation, addressing school funding. $526 million that was allocated to that. That's proposed to be allocated to that, but we'll see when we look at the total impact on the school district that we're not going to get any of that increase. And special education, a slight increase of $40 million statewide. So one thing that you'll notice is that when I show the graph of the impact of the governor's budget, there's no cyber charter transition funding that was reintroduced last year. This is slated to be replaced with a proposal for a uniform statewide cyber charter tuition rate that's stated to potentially save the district $17 million annually if passed, but charter reform is something that has been elusive for many years, so we're not holding our breaths for that one. And there was a proposal to increase the statewide school safety, school facility improvements grant, and we received $5 million of this allocation last year to upgrade building automation controls in 11 of our schools. So we're hopeful that we can apply for that allocation is increased and we can apply for more of that. And other items include $15 million increase statewide for pre-K counts and almost $15 million statewide for early intervention funding. So this is a look at the total impact of the governor's budget. So basic education funding is slated to go up by less than 0.5%, so less than $700,000. Again, that funding formula is based, the weighted student funding distribution is based on the amount of students you have, certain local economic factors, average 3-year daily, average daily membership, and that is run through the formula, and that determines the proportion of that funding that you get. We're level funded for our Ready to Learn block grant at about $10 million. As I mentioned, we're not entitled to any of the adequacy or tax equity supplements based on the means of trying to address the Commonwealth lawsuit in the second year, just because we are not seen, based on the factors that are put forth, as a district that is a district in need based on local economic factors, the amount we spend on our students. There's a 23% increase proposed for career and technical education, and when we look at charter schools, we see that it's a little over $171,000 that's projected to increase. I mentioned that the cyber charter transition funding was going away based on this proposal. It may be replaced with a uniform $8,000 cyber charter rate statewide, but that's yet to be seen. So if we just take all of the subsidies, we're actually looking at losing almost $3 million in funding. So for federal funding, we receive over $56.6 million. That's what we're anticipating to receive in 25-26. Of that, 19.5 goes to what we call academic services. So that's your Title I, II, III, IV, and comprehensive school improvement funding. $17.6 million is for our early childhood program. So that's Head Start, Early Head Start, and portions of IDEA that are targeted at early intervention, and special education, $17.8 million from IDEA and Access funding for school-age programs. And currently, right now, this funding funds almost 362 positions in our district. As of Friday, Dr. Walters was kind enough to forward me an email that came from the acting secretary, Secretary Rowe of the PA Department of Education, that informed us that they received a letter from the U.S. Department of Education Secretary McMahon that stated that the late liquidation period for ESSER funding was adjusted. So that funding period was adjusted to March 28th of 2025, when it was originally supposed to be a year later, which means that we are at risk of not being able to get reimbursed for all of our ESSER funding. So, so late liquidation is no longer being honored. The letter did reference that there might be the ability for us to have certain extensions on a case-by-case basis, but it's the view of the department that we had 120 days, which is required by statute, to liquidate those funds beyond the normal end of the period, and any of those late liquidation approvals were subject to review. The new administration reviewed them and determined that late liquidation would be eliminated, so therefore we're at risk of not being reimbursed the full amount of our ESSER funding. So our financial outlook. So this is just to reiterate where we stand. So end of the year at $11.4 million, but at a deficit of $11.4 million, but going out into 26 and 27, this points us directly at the 26 budget process. If we make no changes right now, we won't have any fund balance, the sufficient unassigned fund balance to get us through 26, get us through the 27 school year, 27 calendar year, and at some point during that year, we will run out of actual cash. So run out of money, no fund balance to cash for our operations. So the time is now to take some action on our finances, so to make sure that we're not in that point of being on a watch list, potentially being put into state receivership like Steelton High Spire was recently placed into. They had a chief recovery officer appointed at the end of March. So we don't want to be there. We don't want to be in a situation where we're asking for state funding advances because we can't meet our obligations. So this is a look at the trajectory of our fund balance. So going back to 2023, there are two components, our total fund balance and our unassigned fund balance. So the blue shows the total amount of money that we have in our fund balance, and the red shows the unassigned, so the amount that's net of our obligations. But one thing to note is that in 2027, that both of those bars go negative. So our next steps. So this takes us to budget planning priorities. So we've heard from the board that you feel that the budget discussion happens too late, that you're not involved, can't see your priorities. So this is where we want to put out there that part of our budget planning priorities are we need to look at cost reduction. We need to evaluate all personnel and non-personnel expenditures and explore certain programmatic changes that may lead to reductions in cost. We know that we're in the top 10 in spending per pupil as a district, and we know that we have certain legacy costs, but we have to take time to address those costs, and that's going to be the focus of our budget planning process. And we also have to look at how do we affect the other side of the equation. There's expenditures and revenues. Do we explore a tax increase, a millage increase? We have seen decreases in our tax base in downtown that has led to decreasing current tax collections. So do we explore a tax revenue increase or a millage increase to attempt to generate some revenue? So this is where we need your feedback. So as part of the budget planning process, we want to make sure that any of these reduction strategies that we employ, whether we're looking at reducing non-salary expenditures, salary expenditures, or any type of programmatic shifts that we feel might lead to some cost reductions, we want to make sure that the manner we go about making those changes that are in line with the board priorities for the budget, and with that, we want to make sure that we're not forgetting to address anything that the board may view as a priority. And we also want to make sure that we're adhering to specific guardrails in the process. So we want to be responsive to the board's vision, and we also want to make sure that if we're making a change, that change isn't counter to what the board would like to see. So this is where I'd like to open the floor up for questions and feedback, but be sure we need your input on those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. I appreciate the overview of our budget and our current financial situation. As I have previously seen this presentation, I don't have any questions. I will open it up to Director Walker raised his hand first. I will open it up to Director Walker.
Thanks, Ms. Yard. Gosh, Ron, can it get any worse than what we're looking at? I mean, it feels like every year we're talking about the same things, and now we have this added dilemma of how we deal, and how we work through the current federal administration. Can you talk to us just a little bit about? I know you're in the early phases, but what are some of the cost-saving methods that you're currently considering, and kind of what does that look like?
So as we begin the budget process, my team and budget, we're reviewing all contracts that are currently in effect and board approved, looking at any non-salary expenditures first and foremost to see if there are any contracts that we can, as a leadership team, look and see if we can look at the effectiveness of those contracts. So that's the first place that we want to look. We're very mindful that we want to try to preserve as much as possible any programs that have a direct effect on students, because we are in the business of educating students. So, but the first step is looking at our non-personnel expenditures to see what costs we can identify there. Then the next step would be looking at personnel, and then the next step would be looking at possible programmatic changes at the school level to see if any of those can lead to any cost reductions, but also do that in a manner where we're not harming programs that students need.
Okay. And then how far along in the process are you of being able to give us an idea of how, the proposed reconfiguration and consolidation changes, what impact that could have on our overall finances in the short term and then in the long term?
Are you referencing the consolidation recommendations from ERS?
Yeah, the ones from Dr. Walters, because we've established that ERS is off the hook. But yeah, like how close are you to being able to talk to us about some of those potential cost savings or lack thereof?
Mr. Walker, Dr. Walters here. So we're still in process. We have looked at a number of scenarios to give the board some information, but that work is still in process. So I prefer not to speak on that at this juncture, but we are working diligently to produce that report.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think, obviously as we continue to think through, what steps need to happen, we need to look at all of those things kind of in tandem. I mean, obviously the white elephants in the room are still the same, right? We still are struggling with the ability to project tax revenue because of the lack of tax reassessment by the county, which is now causing refunds. We still have a significant amount of money being diverted to the city that has long since come out of Act 47, and we have an aging and under-enrolled infrastructure that we need to deal with, and all of those things together, in addition to the challenges that we likely face from the federal government, put us, Pittsburgh Public Schools, but put public schools in general in a really, really tough spot. I think my last question, as we look at, personnel, maybe this isn't a question, maybe it's just something to think about, I think we have to think through, one, do we have the appropriate amount of staffing for the number of students that we have, assuming that we get ourselves into a consolidation where we have less physical buildings. And then two, how do we need to then adjust our site-based budgeting process so that we can ensure that we're able to offer the education that we're promising parents and families that we're going to be able to offer by doing that. And I think that's just another component to the process that might complicate things for you, Mr. Joseph. So I apologize for that. But I think it's something else to consider. And I will pass the microphone to someone else.
Thank you, Director Walker. I think you highlighted two key pieces there to go to Mr. Joseph's questions around what are our priorities for 2026. We have these outstanding questions regarding the financial implications of the potential school closures and school consolidations, as well as the outstanding question of the tax reassessments and the litigation that's happening in that regard, and the money that is still being diverted to the city, which rightfully belongs to PPS. So for me, Mr. Joseph, to answer your first question here, I think one of my priorities for the 2026 budget would be to start to balance this budget to the extent that we can at this stage, knowing that there are unknowns coming. I know that the federal government is also surprising us on a near daily basis regarding funding. But as we move forward in putting together the 2026 budget, something that would be important for me, and I think the rest of the board, would be looking at ways that we start to balance this budget, because if we are going to run into an environment where we lose $50 million, which is almost 10% of our operating budget, because of federal funding changes, we should be prepared, and we should be preparing ourselves financially for that potential outcome, so that we're not in a crisis situation. So that would be my answer to one of your first questions. But I will hand it over to Director Petrowski, who has raised her hand.
Thank you, Ms. Yord. Excuse me. I know that we'll have plenty of time, to discuss our priorities as a board. I do think two things that as we're doing our Council of Great City Schools listening sessions, obviously, I think that's going to inform a lot of the board's priorities as it relates to the budget, as it's going to inform a lot of priorities as it relates to like our goals and Dr. Walters's goals, et cetera, et cetera. But what I would like to see, and this is just myself, considering that the district currently has vacant buildings, it would be a priority, just speaking for myself, to have, a disposition process for those. And I know that, the sale of buildings doesn't necessarily like solve a budget crisis, but it is a lot of maintenance, to upkeep those buildings. And as we go through the consolidation process, there is the possibility of having other empty buildings that will not be used for any purpose. And so I would like to see a disposition process for that as well, just so that, we don't end up with a huge portfolio of empty buildings that we're still going to end up paying for, even though, the district may not be using them. So we can get into nitty gritty later, but that would be a priority for myself. That's all, Ms. Yord. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrowski.
And I just want to add to that, we do have a disposition process, but seeing that we got low in the number of buildings that we actually had, and some of those buildings were possibly earmarked for other usages at the time, we didn't move on those buildings. One of those buildings was very contentious, and we kind of chose not to move forward with that, as was the will of the board. But back in 2013, when we started the process, we had about 20 buildings that we needed to sell, and now we're down to 4 vacant buildings. One of those is being used as a district's warehouse. So we have 3 buildings that are still there to be disposed of. So we have plans. We just need to execute those plans, and I'm confident that we are able to we'll be able to dispose of buildings, whether it be through means of market rate, whether it's working with our various entities such as local governmental entities or redevelopment authorities.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Mr. Joseph. I shouldn't say we need a disposition process. I know we have one in our policy, but I think to your point, is just planning that out. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, and I will just reiterate what Mr. Joseph said. We had the conversation about disposing of some of the outstanding buildings, empty buildings, when I first came on the board last year, and we made the decision at that time that because there was the potential scenario where we're going to be closing schools, that we to dispose of some and then have to do it again. And we made the decision that we would do it all as one big batch. But your point and priority is clear, Ms. Petrowski, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Ms. Silk, I will hand it over to you to facilitate any in-person questions.
Thank you. Director Barker has a question.
Just one really quick question in regards to, jumping back to transportation again, how much of a dent in our budget is it whenever it comes to transportation for the past couple of years, whether it be through the school bus companies or PRT? Are we getting like an amazing bulk rate for the students from middle school and high school that are actually riding Port Authority or PRT? And what does it look like in regards to the actual yellow school buses for elementary school students and whoever else has to actually ride them? I believe Perry rides school buses as well.
So that was a compound question. So just so I can understand it, so in terms of the dent in our budget for transportation, we're looking at each year about $40 million. This past year was, I think, 45. I think we're budgeted 42 for this year. That number, as far as carrier rates, tends to go up by 3 to 5% each year. Port Authority, PRT, those rates go up whenever the new rates are set. In terms of bulk rate, I don't believe we receive a bulk rate for students. I believe we just pay the monthly pass rate. I'd have to confirm that with our Director of Transportation. But you're looking at anywhere between probably 9-ish% of our, well, probably more like 6% of our budget, because it's around the same amount as debt service. So you're looking about 6% of our budget goes to transportation, and that includes transportation for our students and charter students and students in private and parochial schools.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions regarding the ESSER reimbursements. Do you have the amount of unreimbursed funds that we have so far?
$15 million.
Okay, thank you. And then I just to follow on the transportation question, can you unpack a little bit what because it's so looking at the actuals, it's like a $10 million increase year over year. What was driving that for the most part, that increase in that expenditure?
I think a big part of that increase was there's a line item for transportation for students, and well, I believe it's like what we record as the transportation IU, which is our special education transportation, and I believe in one year where it just caught up in terms of the reimbursement, because the way the state pays us for special ed transportation and then they charge us, they reflect it as a expenditure. So I think it was just the timing one year that made that much higher, and it was that specific line item. I believe it was object code 516, where in previous years it was 5.7. One year was low in terms of like 3, and then it jumped up. So I think it was just a timing issue of that payment.
Thank you for that clarification. And then I missed this detail for the when you were presenting the governor's budget, information about the governor's budget, the school facility improvements grant. Is that a grant that we are eligible to reapply for, even though we've received it? Was that what you were saying, that we are eligible to reapply?
Yes, I believe so. These grants typically you can apply each year. It's a competitive process, and if you are successful each year, then you receive more funding.
Thank you. Those are the questions in the room. Director Yord. Dr. Walters has a question. Pardon me.
Okay.
Yes, I just had one follow-up, because I know that I heard a lot of responses to bullet item number 1. Did anyone would like to offer any recommendations for the guardrails as we go through this process? And if none, that's fine at this time, and you'd like to have some time to think about it, but I just wanted to elevate that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walters. I think one of my guardrails, so I said one of my priorities was let's try to balance the budget and start presenting scenarios for how we go about balancing the budget as a school district. I think one of my guardrails there would be I'm interested in balancing our budget without sacrificing academic resources for our students. That's a critical thing there, and I don't want us to start having to make difficult decisions about cutting teachers or science classes or art in an effort to balance our budget. So that would be one of my personal guardrails.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I think we'll let other board directors think about that and discuss at our May meeting, which I will not be leading, but Director Walker has offered to lead it in my stead. So we'll make, depending on other agenda items, we'll lead a discussion around our board priorities and guardrails for the budget planning process once everybody's had a few weeks to absorb the information we've been presented, absorb any additional fun executive orders that come out of the federal government, and go from there. If there are no other questions on the line, Mr. Joseph, did you have anything else that you wanted to share with the board?
No, thank you for your engagement and attention tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, thank you everybody for being in the Business and Finance Committee meeting tonight. Happy to adjourn it. Hope everybody goes home and stays warm this week as the cold weather comes upon us. Have a good night, everyone.